So, Luca, finally we are here. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation and be on the podcast, the xMonks, right?
Hi, yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Pleasure. Uh, that's what we were discussing. Initially, it was like extremely difficult, one, to get onto you, to get a date in your calendar. And the second one was the technical glitches that we were dealing with.
That's true. But now we're here, right? We finally made it.
Absolutely. So, Luca, without wasting any more time, let me just dive into the topic for which you're known for.
Yeah.
You are a community builder, and I'm so excited to talk about this because I can relate with this concept. I could relate with this identity. I relate with the entire concept of bringing people together, rallying people together for a common cause. In fact, the world is talking about communities and community-led growth in the organizations. Just curious, from a veteran like you, what is a community and what does it mean when I say community-led growth?
Cool. Yeah, so maybe a little bit background information about myself. So I'm the global community lead at Camunda. So that's a software company. So our community is, there are a lot of developers that we are focusing on. And I think the question what a community is really interesting, because probably if you ask like a lot of different people, you will get a lot of different answers because it's such a term, such a broad term. And that's why I think it's a really interesting question. But I think for me, there are mainly three different things that I feel are super important when it comes to community. So first of all, it's really about a sense of belonging. So people that are part of a community, they feel a sense of belonging. And second, I think it's super important that members have the feeling that they matter. So that they really matter to each other, but also that they matter to the group. And then there's a third aspect, and I think that's actually super important, is it all comes down to that a community is valuable to people. So that it's actually meaningful that people join a community. So that means the third aspect is that members really have the feeling that when they join a community, that their needs are fulfilled. So always when you want to build a community, then you should definitely keep in mind that it's valuable to its members, because no one would actually join a community if it's not valuable.
Makes sense. So what I'm picking up at the broad level is a sense of belongingness. How am I relevant to the community and what value am I driving from the community? Is my understanding right?
Yes, exactly. And I think you also ask about community-led growth, right? So community-led growth is actually something that a lot of people are talking about at the moment. And I think if you put it like simple, then it's really that you turn your users into advocates. So it's not like the concept that you just have customers and that there's just this basic funnel that we usually know, like in a marketing term, that you sell something to people and then it ends there, but actually it goes a step further. So when you actually sell something to people, then you actually turn them into advocates. So it doesn't stop there. You actually nurture the connection, you nurture the relationship. And I actually think, I think a lot of people can relate to that. If someone really tells you about like either a product or something that they like, and they're really passionate about it, then you would probably really believe that. And then that would be way more meaningful to you than if a salesperson would say something like that. And I think this is also why it's such a like important term at the moment, community-led growth, because it's really about like turning your users into advocates and that they actually engage in the community, that they onboard other people. And yeah, I think that is just super important. And I think that's really, really powerful.
So, at the end of the day, whether we are talking about different kinds of marketing, what really matters is word of mouth from people who have actually used, experienced your product and your services.
Yes. And I think sometimes it can sound like, I don't know, I think when you really want to build a community, you have to be honest about it. I think sometimes it really also sounds like a marketing approach, just another marketing approach, and that's how you get like customers best. But I think it's really also about, as I said, the sense of belonging is super important, that it's really that you're honest about that, and that you really care for the people in your community, so that it's not just a superficial thing to do and you just do it because you want to sell, but it's actually something I think you just have to be honest about it, and that you really care about the people in your community.
Makes sense. It boils down to where you're operating from. How authentic are you when you're talking about community-led growth? Are you putting profits above community, or are you putting community above profits? And that approach is going to shift everything, what you're going to bring in that conversation. Just curious, Luca, when did you get introduced to the concept of community, and how did you realize that this is what you would like to get involved into, or what got your attention?
Yeah, so when I think about it, actually, I think I got introduced to the concept of community super early. I think probably I wouldn't have called it community to that time. So when I was a kid, I mean, I have a super special bond with my mom, I have to say. And actually, like, a lot of people kind of have raised me, I would say. So a lot of friends of my mom, they had such an influence on me, and they raised me, and they just took care of me, I would say. And so I got the sense really early when I was a kid, when you really like have a community and you can trust people, you feel a connection, and there's really a sense of belonging, how much trust that can give you and how much stability that can give you, and also how that can encourage your growth, right? And so something that I've done for a long time already is like volunteering work. So I'm a board member at an association. It's called Signal of Solidarity. And actually, that is a really engaged community. And I'm always so impressed what can happen when you actually join forces, and when you have like a common passion, and when you work towards a common goal. So that is actually something that I always like, that was just really kind of crazy to me, how like what you can actually achieve with a community. And personally, I have been always super passionate about like building meaningful relationships, and also initiatives that actually help others thrive, and to support others in their growth. And this is actually why then it kind of became my job. And this is also why I love my job so much, because I can really facilitate growth, I can support people. And for me, it's really about the people. So for me, it's not in the end just about like marketing, but it's really about the people and about the connections.
I just love it when people talk about it's all about people and it's all about connection, because I could relate with that. You know, my initial version of community was when people would ask me, are you involved in any kind of community work? And for me, community work was always associated with social work, where you're not paid for that. And when first time I heard about community-led growth, for me, that was a dichotomy. On one hand, we are talking about community work. On the other hand, we are talking about business growth. How do they fit into that? And when I started studying about that, when I started meeting people like yourself, right, I got first-hand education. For me, every interaction with you was like sitting in a university and learning from a professor, and from somebody who has played a very vital role in building this entire concept, entire ecosystem of community. Just curious, Luca, would it be a fair assumption to make that we can build communities and we can actually go for community-led growth in all industries? I mean, product industry, service industry. Tell me more about that. How you have been instrumental in putting together a community for software developers. So let's say tomorrow you were to work with a product company, right? Apple or let's say Tesla. How would a community show up in that segment?
I think you can basically translate the concept of community to basically a lot of industries. And as you said, I mean, not every community is related to a business. Obviously, now it's becoming more and more important to build brand communities. And obviously, that's something that I do as part of my job. But also what I've talked about regarding the volunteering work, that's not a brand community, but that's actually just a community because people share the same passion and
same purpose.
Yes, exactly. So it's really about the purpose. And so basically you can translate it to any setting, I would say. But as I said at the beginning, it's really about like meeting members' needs and really identifying their pain points. So if you don't offer any value, no community will be built. So I think it's really about identifying, okay, where might be a pain point? What's maybe something that actually people need? Because if there is no value at all, then no one will engage in your community. And I think that's always so important to always ask yourself, okay, what do I actually offer to people and why should they even join my community? In our case, for example, with developers, so there is so much going on in the tech universe and people always want to learn, they want to gather knowledge, and that's actually also why they connect with each other and they learn from each other and they also kind of educate each other and onboard each other. So I think this is something, there is kind of a pain point that they want to get more knowledge, they want to learn more. As I said, regarding like the volunteering work I do, it's really about the common purpose and we have like a shared identity, I would say. I think this is also something super important when it comes to communities, is kind of gives you part of identity, right? So I think when you think about the communities you might be part of or that you have ever joined in your life, usually there's like part like that kind of shapes identity. And I think that is super important. Yeah. And yeah, so I think you can actually translate it to like a lot of industries and in a lot of areas, but there always needs to be value, otherwise it won't work.
Yeah. You know, I can actually loop it back to when you spoke about a sense of belonging. And there's a sense of identity as well, that I belong to so-and-so group, I belong to so-and-so association, I belong to so-and-so brand. People take pride in saying that we use Apple, right? We use Samsung, we use iOS, we use Android. We take pride in saying that, right? So, yeah. You know, also something you said so beautiful during our last conversation. You said people can definitely copy your product or service. They cannot copy the sense of community. So when you said that the sense of community cannot be copied, you know, it continued to play in my head. And I could not wait to ask you, hey, Luca, what does it mean when you say sense of community cannot be copied? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it's actually something that I really believe in, because at the moment, of course, like people can always copy your ideas. People can start a business. I mean, it's really difficult to start a business, of course, but yeah, you can copy so many things. But I think like really the community and the sense of belonging, you cannot copy at all. So because a community is really about the people and that they engage. And I think something that is also super important about community and what we just talked about, like community-led growth, that you turn people actually into advocates. That is something that you cannot copy, that people connect with each other, the relationships that they have. And I think, yeah, this is just why I think you really cannot copy this community feeling. And that's why it becomes more and more important, because especially right now, building products can be super easy. There's so many low-code options how you can build something super easily. But yeah, the sense of community, you can definitely not copy.
Now, let's consider a community is a product or a service, right? And as you said, that anybody can actually start a company, start a business, right? Now, I personally believe that starting a community and ensuring that the community continues to thrive are two different things. What, according to you, are the best ways to build a community and ensure it continues to thrive?
Yeah, I think that's actually a super important point that you mentioned there, that there are definitely a lot of different stages in a community journey, right? So I think there might be some people who just start a community and it's kind of like, I call it like the seed stage, that it's really there. It's really about like nurturing relationships. You really have to put a lot of time and effort into nurturing that, because otherwise I think the community will be dead quite quickly. And so you always have to consider, when you establish a community strategy, you always have to consider, in what stage am I actually in? Am I actually in the seed beginning stage, or am I already like, is my community already growing? Do I have to already, or do I actually have members and it already grows organically? And I think this is definitely something always to consider, because when you start a community, it really takes a lot of time to really, yeah, a lot of effort also to onboard your community members well. I think actually onboarding is one of the really main things. But also when you start a community, I think reaching out to like the very first members you have, getting in touch with them, finding out, okay, why did they even join my community? What is valuable to them? What can I maybe improve to make it even more valuable to them? This is definitely something that we do a lot with all our programs. So at Camunda, when we start a program, a community program, we always ask ourselves, okay, what might be valuable to our community members? But we don't just say like, okay, and now we're starting the program because we think it's valuable. But of course, we ask like the community members that we have, and we ask them, is that actually something that would be valuable to you? Okay, and if we would build it, how would you like to see this being built? Because this is also something, I'm managing the Camunda Champion program. So this is a program for our most dedicated and invested community contributors. So it's kind of like an ambassador program. And when I started that, I did like a feedback session with some of our community members. I asked them what they liked about the idea, if this is something they would like to join, what kind of rewards would they like to see, things like that. And from this feedback, I got so many insights. So I think that starting a community, that is super important, talking to people. But then actually at a later stage, it changes a little, because I think then things get more complex and you actually have to put more structure into your community. And I think this is probably something that will happen later.
So the voice of the customer is extremely important, whether you are onboarding, whether you are in the growth phase, or you're in the maturity or in the thriving phase.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's something that you always have to consider, what stage you're actually in, if you want to build a strategy, because otherwise your strategy won't be successful.
And I'm sure that's another session that I'll have to take from you in terms of what could be the possible strategy when you're dealing with this product or that service. You know, my assumption is, Luca, and you are an expert in that. My limited experience is that doing all that in person is much easier and effective. I'm just curious, in the last 2 years, on one hand, the pandemic has changed the way world has witnessed businesses. But at the same time, it's only in the last 2 years I've started to hear about community-led growth. So how has pandemic changed the community dynamics and the ways to engage the community, since people cannot meet in person that often?
Yes, so actually the pandemic had like a lot of influence on the whole community industry, definitely. I actually think also the pandemic has kind of shown us even more how important community is. Also, precisely, not just a brand community, but also like a personal community, that you feel a sense of belonging, that even when you're alone at home, that you have people you can count on, that you feel connected to. And I think the pandemic just showed us so much how important that is. And in terms of community-led growth and brand communities, I think actually, I even think during the pandemic, so many companies started looking for community members because they realized how important that is. And that is actually not just marketing, but that you, of course, you need marketing, you need the awareness stage, but you also need someone taking care of your community, really nurturing your community members, nurturing your users, and then, as I said, turning them into advocates.
Precisely.
And for us, actually, before the pandemic, well, not everything, but I think almost everything was on site. So that was actually quite a change. And we have a really, really international community. So we have like a big community in Brazil, a big community in Russia, in India, in Germany. And actually, then during the pandemic, of course, we had to adapt super quickly because we couldn't meet on site anymore. People were at home. But also for us, it actually opened new opportunities because we were actually actually able to also meet people, kind of, even though it's virtual, but we were able to actually go to a meetup in India or in Brazil and actually meet our community members. And it was so nice for me to also be in touch so often with like our community members from all around the world. So I actually think there are some things that, face-to-face interaction, I mean, I just think it's super important from time to time. And I also know that our community members, they really miss that. And it's something that always comes up. But on the other hand, there are so many opportunities also with like online communities, building online communities. You can reach completely different target groups that you before weren't able actually to reach. And for us, that was really, really a great opportunity to also meet people where they are and actually be more in touch with them.
This is so fascinating because what we are discussing right now, Apple implemented that way back, right? Apple ensured that anyone who buys a product gets into the ecosystem and continues to buy more, continues to consume more. So, which is definitely a success story. But at the same time, if you look at the airline industries, the rewards point that they started giving, right? Or the hospitality industries where hotels started to hand over the reward points. Even they have been doing this for the longest period of time. And yet, especially in the airline industries, there's a switch people have witnessed. They'll be very comfortable to move from one airline to another airline. What's your take on that? How's the rewards and the recognition associated with the community?
I actually think that's crucial. I think like rewards rewards can be a lot of things, right? But I think definitely recognition is super important, that you show people that you see them, that you actually adjust to meet their needs. And that's also how they see actually that they are seen. And I think that's super crucial because we also know for ourselves, right? I think that's just how we are as humans. We kind of want to feel seen. We want to feel rewarded, and reward can, for maybe some communities, reward is actually you get swag, you get this, you get that. But maybe a reward is also people take care of you. They reach out to you. It's a special bonding. So I think rewards and recognition that can go in many different directions, but I just think it's super crucial, especially when we talk about turning users into advocates. I think you always kind of need that people, of course, they will ask, okay, why should I join? Why should I join this community? And I think one reward might be also knowledge, or that you can follow the same passion, that you connect because you have the same passion or the same vision, things like that. But I think actually this is also really the job of people working in the community industry, recognizing people, really showing that they matter. And I think so that's super, super crucial.
Yeah, recognizing that they matter, they are relevant, and ensuring that they get a lot of value. Since we are talking about rewards and recognition, and that could be a possible challenge, if not done well, could hamper the community growth. What are the other challenges in building a community, according to you, Luca?
Yeah, so I think obviously there can always be like challenges also when building a community. I think what we talked about before is actually identifying the pain points and really offering value. That's for me the most crucial part, definitely.
So identifying the challenge itself could be a big challenge.
That could be the challenge, but especially like the pain point why people join your
want
community.
To be a part of community.
Yes, exactly. And also then offering the value, because if you just want, if you just start a community because you want to drive sales, it will probably not work because no one will get something out of it. And I think this will be or can be probably a main challenge. So you don't offer enough value. That could be definitely a challenge. And then obviously when starting a community, it's also about like that people actually hear about your community. So you also need to meet people where they are. And that's why I think that can be always a challenge, that people never heard of your community, and they never heard of your community, they most likely won't join your community. So I think this is then also the question for you. Okay, who is actually my target group? Who are the people that I want in my community? Because I think that's a crucial first step. Because I think if you just say, I want everyone to be part of my community, that just won't work. You always need to identify the niche. And then you can ask yourself, where do I actually meet those people? How do I actually reach out to those people? And I think it's not just about like, I don't know, sending 100 Twitter tweets and posting on LinkedIn, because that also won't offer value. But it's really about like constant, like that you actually also create content and that you create things that are valuable to your target audience. And that's how you actually engage people. So yeah, I think one of the main challenges can definitely be not offering enough value. And the second one, that people don't hear about it, and you really have to identify where you meet people. Obviously, there can be also other challenges, but I think those are two main things that I feel are important.
What a beautiful shift I could actually experience, because till now we were only talking about being in a community and looking at what are the possible challenges that I might come across, which I did not even consider is how am I attracting the right kind of audience in the community? Because even if there's one person who's not in alignment to the values and the purpose of the community, can actually spoil the entire ecosystem. Now, that brings me to another question. How do you identify and handle people who might not be in alignment with the values and the purpose of the community? And they're only there to take from the community, rather provide. So
yeah, actually, that's a super important point, right? And I think something that is actually crucial for that, first of all, is that you know yourself, what are my values or what are the community values, and what are our guidelines. So I think
as a
it's
community
super
leader.
important. Yes, exactly. I think it's super important to be clear about what are our guidelines. So having a code of conduct where you actually specifically say what you want and don't want is super important, because sometimes we assume that people know everything, and that's just something you should know, that you don't do this or don't do that. But I think you cannot expect people to always know that, especially considering when you have an international community. There are so many cultural differences. Maybe in one culture, some things would be fine. In another culture, that's actually a no-go. And I think being super explicit about that, what you want and what you don't want, I think that is super important, so that you are aware of that yourself. And then you talked about values. I think that is something also really crucial. So that is actually a project we are working on at the moment at Camunda. We are identifying together with our community our core community values, because I believe we have a really strong culture, if you want to say so. Even though I feel it's super important that people don't have the feeling that they always have to fit into the culture, but it's really like culture add-on. So probably our community will always change the more people join, but that's actually a good thing. So I want to welcome that, and that is definitely something that we want to see, because each and every community member should bring their their personal traits and should also shape the community. But I think it's super important. That's why we don't want to say this is the culture that we have and we want to stick to that and we never want to change that. But instead, we should be super clear about the values that we have. And this is why it's super important to identify the community values that you have. And in the best scenario, you do that together with your community. And this is something actually we are working on at the moment. And I think it's a super crucial step. Also to always refer back to that and to say, hey, this is actually what we want to encourage. This is what we want to see. And otherwise, you cannot really expect people to always be aligned with your values, with your community code of conduct, if you just don't have it in place. And maybe then someone asks you like, okay, what are actually our values or your values? And you're like, well, I don't even know. So I think that's super important. But obviously also protecting your community members is really important. So if people really constantly do things that don't align with your code of conduct, then definitely it's also important to protect other community members and to make sure, I think that's your responsibility as a community leader, to also make sure that others are protected, that people feel safe in a community, that your community is inclusive, things like that. I think that's super crucial. And I think that's also my role as a community leader, to really make sure that people are protected.
As easy as it may sound, that build a community, what does that mean? Bring some people together and start moving towards that purpose. I'm sure there's a science and an art to that, because there are several threads involved. On one hand, we are talking about that we would like to have people from diverse backgrounds so that they can bring in diverse perspectives. And that's where the community, the overall collective intelligence of the group moves to the next level. So that's one part of it. At the same time, we would like to take care of the values and be protective of the purpose and the values that we would like to have in the organization. At the same time, we cannot have any element coming in that might spoil or disrupt the boat. So there are several threads attached to that. Definitely. Is my understanding right?
Yes, definitely. And I think also really taking that into account, how inclusive is your community actually? I think that is super, super crucial. And I think you just summarized it really well. So there are a lot of different areas and that all go hand in hand, I would say.
Luca, as I'm just looking at different communities, it's like if you look at different organizations as well, in an organization, you'll find people working together, and after some time, a group of people will move out and create another organization and will become the competition to the first organization. If you look at different associations as well, whether it's a Rotary Club, the Lions Club, and there are different clubs, the Gymkhana clubs, so-and-so clubs in the world, right? There are clubs who are working together, and after some time, you'll find a group of people will come out and create another competition for the very essence from which you learned everything. So how do you as a community leader hold boundaries in place where they don't make sub-communities and move out of the same?
Actually, I think that's a super common thing. I think we talked about different stages before, right? So like when you have like the seed stage, then your community grows. And I think like kind of the very last stage is that sub-communities, then there are sub-communities, and that kind of the community spreads out. Because when your community gets really big, I think that's really, really common that then maybe this one topic isn't enough anymore, but then there are different subtopics. And for example, for our community, we obviously have the Camunda community as a whole, but we have our local meetup groups. And in like a lot of areas, there are actually meetup organizers who organize their own events and they build their own communities. And obviously they also have their own like guidelines, standards, But I think something that is super important is that this is all under the umbrella of the main community, and that you make sure that there are some things, for example, as I said, with the code of conduct, that's just non-negotiable, that people abide to the code of conduct or the community values. Probably, of course, there's a different dynamic in every subgroup, and I think that's completely normal. And I actually think that's also a positive thing. I mean, that shows like your community grows and there are so many different aspects, and you can also like connect to so many different people. And then there might be those subgroups. But I think it's super important that there's always this umbrella, and that you make sure that some things are just non-negotiable, and that they also always get back to you, and that you also offer then always like events or things like that where everyone comes together. And I think then you can really benefit from that. So I think it's just maybe what you're referring to, if you just say, okay, do whatever you want, and now you're in the own community. I mean, that's fine if that's something you want, but in an ideal scenario, everyone can learn from each other. And this is why then also, for example, as a company, it's the responsibility to bring actually everyone together. So for example, we have an annual conference. So each year we actually have 2 different conferences, and that's where the whole community gathers, and like people from all over the world, they connect with each other. And I think that's super important to, as I said in the beginning, like the sense of belonging, that you really feel the sense of belonging, but within the whole community, or not just within your subgroup, but you are actually part of something bigger.
Makes so much sense. Makes so much sense. You know, on the other hand, on the hint side, I'm just experiencing that probably thousands of years back, when religions were formed, they would have also formed with a common purpose to build awareness, to raise consciousness in people. At the same time, there's an element of sense of identity. There's an element of sense of belonging. But the very fact, the very basic essence because of which religions came. Today, if you look at religions divide, what do you see is the future of communities? Do you think that at any point in time, it will become a reason for division for humanity? You know, I belong to an Apple community. You belong to Samsung community, let's assume, or vice versa. Do you think that could be a possible reason for the division as well?
That's a good question. I think in the end, it's really about belonging. And obviously, sometimes when you belong to something, that can also exclude others, right?
Yeah. And I belong to this, I don't belong to that.
Definitely. So I think there's always a threat that you might be excluding other people, and then there are 2 sides. And I think this is also something we probably see in the world at the moment, that there are like 2 sides. And I think this is definitely something we want to prevent. So as I said, a community, in my understanding, a community should always be inclusive, even though it can be the case that people are excluded. In the ideal scenario, I actually think like when people really feel a sense of belonging, and when they really feel that they have people in the network they can trust, that they can learn from each other, that's a positive thing. So for me, that is actually the goal of community. But I think there's always the threat that things like that happen. But this is also then for us as the community leaders to make sure that actually the community is inclusive, that you don't exclude other people. So I think this is something we see, and I think there's always a threat. And I think it's something we cannot just say, oh, this is something that won't happen and will never happen. But things like that, we have to actively make sure that it doesn't happen, and we have to actively prevent that, because otherwise, you're probably right, things like that can happen.
Yeah, because, you know, for as much as we are talking about community-led growth, it's not that we have not experienced that in the past. There was a time when people were very comfortable working with their own family members, and then came the concept of tribes. And that's what Ken Wilber talks about in Spiral Dynamics, right? So it has happened in the past, and I'm sure it would happen in the future as well. Now, the point is, how aware, how consciously awakened are we who are coming together, either to build communities or coming together to be a part of a community? Coming to you, Luca, just my last question. You have been in this space for the longest period of time, building communities. You love people. You are passionate about bringing people together, making sure people grow together. They move towards a common purpose. There is alignment. Let's assume if there's a book written on Luca, what would be the title?
Actually, I think that's a really interesting question. Probably, I don't know. I think it would be probably always depending on when you ask me what would be the title. But at the moment, I actually thought about it, and at the moment for me, it would be, I think I told you in our first initial call that when I thought about kind of like my mantra, it's kind of what's meant for me won't miss me. So I personally probably would write a book about like what's meant for you won't miss you, because I personally really believe in when you're super passionate about something and when you really focus on what you're passionate about, sometimes opportunities just arise that you would have never thought that that's actually a thing. Actually, when I started working in the field of community, I always did the things that I was most passionate about. But I didn't think, oh, at some point I will work in community and I will do this and that. Because for me, when I was younger, that wasn't even an option. I didn't even know that this is a thing. I didn't know that this is a job. And personally, I just followed like my passion, and I just followed what I'm most passionate about. And then at some point I realized, wow, there's like such a big community of community leaders. It's like a whole industry, actually. And I didn't even know of that. So, and it just brought me there because I did the things that I was most passionate about. So, yeah, I think, as I said, I think like what's meant for me, or also what's meant for others, if they really believe in that, then this won't miss them. And this is probably right now what I would call my book, or what the title would be.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Luca. And this is so fascinating because at one point in time, the only professions available in the market were either you could be a doctor, engineer, or a lawyer, right? But now the world is opening up. For as long as you've been able to identify your gifts, your talents, your superpowers, there's an industry out there. And even if there's no industry, I'm sure you can go and reach to Luca to start a community altogether. Luca, thank you so much. What a pleasure interacting with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a real pleasure to be here.
Pleasure is all mine, and thank you so much, and look forward to interact with you as we march ahead to build more soulful, purposeful communities in the world, where all of them, they can come together when the need be, and then they can walk on their respective paths otherwise. So thank you so much.
Thank you.